Ladies and gentlemen, behind me you can see 7 theses of my presentation. It's the thread that runs through it, and as you can see, I will deal with the topic of the conference, more prevention, fewer victims. I will show you how this, where the slogan works and where it doesn't, and that creates the basis for speaking about parallel justice. Since my time is short, I will not give you too many percentages. I have to cut it short somewhere, but you can read it all under www.präventionstag.de. I would like to start with a basic form of heavy victimization, beating children. If you save on the cane, you spoil the child, is a slogan or something said which is attributed to the king of Assyria. And the Bible says, if you spare your cane, you hate your son. But if you love your son, you beat him. Behind that is the religious belief that people as such are bad. They are sinners. And you have to counteract that very harshly to drive the devil out of a child's body with the cane. And that was more than just a slogan for hundreds of years. But then independent people in the Age of Enlightenment found out other things, such as Michel de Montaigne, the French philosopher who said, the only effect of the cane I've seen is that it makes children cowards or ne'er-do-wells. John Locke, the English philosopher, was against the concept of inborn sin, which has to be counteracted by beating children. For him, children are like white paper or like wax, which you can mold negatively or positively. 70 years later, Jean-Jacques Rousseau juxtaposes original sin to the innocence of children. Children should be given the chance of unfolding their creativity to learn from their own experience step by step. But it took 200 more years till in Sweden and then in the Scandinavian countries, the wonderful books by Astrid Lindgren paved the way for a basic reform. First, in the 1950s, 1960s, teachers were forbidden to use the cane, and in later decades, parents were forbidden to beat their children too. Germany followed suit in 2000, forbidding parents to beat their children. Empirical science did something to help that. In international criminology, there was David Farrington, Terence Thornbury, and Alveus. And from Germany, Friedrich Lösel, Hans-Jürgen Kerner, and Peter Wetzels. Today, the thesis of Montaigne has been proven scientifically in many ways. Our school survey of 4,000 ninth grade students showed that children who have been always beaten by their parents are 5 times more likely to become violent criminals than children brought up with love and non-violence. It also showed that there is a political relevance of this. Parents who beat their children do not give them any other positive ways of solving conflicts. They give them a wrong message instead, meaning the stronger person must and can prevail over the weaker one. So it's not a surprise that children who have been beaten are 3 times more likely to show right-wing extremism than other children. The political implication of educational culture is also shown by 3 representative studies of adults carried out since 2004. The more often these people were beaten by their parents and felt helpless and the more they want to own a weapon, because that gives them power and also brushes up their battered ego. And we found something else. If you live in constant fear of your parents beating you, you will later be more likely to assume that you are threatened by other people's violence. So these people want harsh deterrence against evil, all the way to demanding the death penalty. Another good example is a survey of the OECD of 2008. The survey was carried out in 20 European countries, measuring the social abilities of school students. Those from Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark showed the highest values in tolerance and in trusting other people. That seems to be a consequence of the fact that these 4 countries were the first in the world to propagate the ideal of nonviolent education. But how did educational culture develop here? 2 representative surveys, which we did in 1992 and in 2011, give an answer. The data show a clear trend. More love, less beatings. The share of those who grew up without any violence at all was raised from 26 to 52%. The first 2 yellow columns show that. And if we look at the younger ones, the 16 to 20-year-olds of the last survey in 2011, the share of those raised with nonviolence rises to 63%. And you can see clearly the green chart that has risen, the love that parents showed by hugging them and by caressing them. Light beatings are down to 36 from 58%. And what gives you courage? The youngest, which we surveyed last, only 7% of 16 to 20-year-olds were beaten massively during the past years. That has a positive consequence. The new production of youth violence by parents beating them is on the decrease. So the statistics here come as no surprise. These are the data of health insurances, of consequences of injuries resulting from battles at schools where the victim had to go to hospital or to be treated by doctors. 40% decrease since 1997, and in the second category of severe accidents, such beatings is down by 66%. The school service show that youth violence is really on the decrease. And the police statistics confirm that even though we see a higher readiness to report such incidents, since 2007, there is decrease by about a fifth for 100,000 youngsters. This is in line with the motto of this conference: more prevention, fewer victims, but you can also say more resilience, fewer victims. I would like to come to a term that I will mention again, which is children raised with non-violence who have a strong bonding to their parents win the power to deal with their lives and cope with their lives, even when their lives are difficult. So resilience means that a person can make use of their own resources and use them so that they're helpful. So resilience has a preventive power, but it also has a high significance in how people cope with having been a victim. I will give you more examples about that later, but first I would like to come back to one aspect which played an important role at the beginning of my speech: Christian religion and its significance in educational patterns. That seems to make sense because the Enlighteners were against church traditions in education. My question is, therefore, do Christian communities, are they still under the influence of those earlier ideas? We fell back on the data of 350,000 Germans, those who said they are part of a Christian community and have been baptized. Half of them were Protestant, the others Catholic. But among the Protestants, there were 431 who said that they belong to a free church, free Protestant church. Their data were evaluated selectively because there were alarming newspaper articles from a book from a free church person from the US. Take deep breath when you have to use the cane and pray, let this be a good lesson. Don't tear your child. Don't raise your voice. The child should see the cane coming. If you have to sit on the child to beat it, don't hesitate to do so, and keep the child in that position till it stops resisting. For older children, if you don't beat them hard enough, the child will still be restive. If that's the case, take your time and explain, and then continue beating. Never stop disciplining the child before the child has surrendered. The German version of the book was issued in 2008. It was sold about 4,000 times before then the federal authority on media dangerous for young people banned the book. But the free churches, the free church communities which were interested in that book made sure that there is a German follow-up book by the American priest and author Ted Tripp. Another quote from that book: the cane is by definition parental duty. Physical education, physical beatings is an act of faith. God wants you to use it. This book too was banned in Germany last week. Yesterday I received the text. On the 30th of April the ban will be published in the Federal Gazette. Picture 2 shows what comes from beating children, depending on the family's Catholic or Protestant or Free Church Protestant. And it's also differentiated as to how the young people see the religiousness of their parents. The result shows that very religious Protestant parents, 16.9%, that's the red column in the middle, are more likely to use beatings than very religious Catholic parents. But all that is a totally different world from the world you see if I look at the data of the Free Church families. The red charts show it that the more religious the parents are, the more they beat. You see that at the top, but also at the bottom, the green one, the non-violent field. Not so religious people, 56% raise their children non-violently, but only 21% among the highly religious people. We repeated the surveys with 11,500 people in 2011. One question complex was also how religious were your parents, how religious are you, and what was your childhood like? And the picture, unfortunately, is very much the same. I won't go into the details. Of course, these different educational patterns leave their traces with the children. For Catholics and Protestants, it's true that the more religious they are, the less they use violence. But for the free churches, that correlation is not there, unfortunately. We looked at how satisfied the children are with their life. For the Catholics, the more religious, the more satisfied. The same went for the Protestant, but not for the Free Church Protestants. They had a very low satisfaction in life. It's no surprise. And lastly, the more religious the young Catholics were, the fewer they thought about suicide. For the Free Church Protestants, there is a weak trend in the other direction. But this 1% of young people, you might say, why do you use so much time for that issue? Well, if you look at the USA, the picture is quite different. There, 26% on average belong to Protestant free churches. In the southern states, it's more than 50%. And a finding is in line with that, done by Human Rights Watch. In the US, in 2009, more than 200,000, especially in the southern states, more than 200,000 students were beaten publicly by their teachers. In most southern states, that's legal, and the American parents are allowed to beat their children nationwide. There were 2 surveys about that, showing that only 15% of American children are raised non-violently at the moment. 70% of American parents agree with this sentence: children need a good beating now and then. The figures show what a repressive educational culture there is in the US under the strong influence of fundamentalist Christian groupings. It is obvious that that has political consequences. The division of the American nation, the power of the Tea Party, the intolerance of the conservatives against liberal groups, the high potential of aggression of the American society and their urge to, their desire to carry weapons and to punish others. All this is supported by the repressive educational cultures in families and schools. And the US pay a high price for that. For each 100,000 citizens, 8 to 10 more people are in jail compared to Europe. 18 times more people are killed by gunshots, and the same goes for other violent crimes. But other factors play a role here, such as the hard survival fight of the people affected by poverty in the US, or the historically grown tradition of carrying weapons. But this repressive backwards educational culture also has a strong influence. That has repercussions on us because they are the leading culture of this of the earth. So, as a reaction to the last shooting spree, you shouldn't only try to limit private gun ownership, but what the US need is a demilitarization in their heads. But that presupposes a radical change in educational culture. So we shouldn't stand aside no longer, but we should send an appeal to this grand nation and its president. Finally, abolish the right to beat children. Ladies and gentlemen, after this these political remarks, I would like to carry on with what I have announced, the 2 examples for the significance of resilience. The first is about child abuse. We had the 2 surveys of 92 and 2011. They show a positive trend similar to that which I reported about beatings by parents. The risks of under 16-year-olds to become the victims of an abuse has decreased from 7.1% to 4.4%. If you look at the cases that involve physical contact. When looking for explanations, there is one finding which is significant from the survey of 92. A high risk, as Peter Wetzel found out, very high risk of abuse is carried by those children who are beaten and neglected very strongly at home. Those who don't get enough parental love, feel insecure and pass it along. And pedophile people have a feeling for that, they approach particularly those children and take possession of them. But those who could grow up strong at home and have a lot of self-esteem and have a lot of resilience are not in such great danger to be abused by an uncle, a neighbor, a priest, or a stranger. And if it happens, the stronger and more active victims have much more power than they used to have to end that story, to get help, and to report the case. The report of 2011 shows this clearly if you compare the younger and older children, which we surveyed, the 31 to 40 years olds, who were children about 20 years ago, in the 80s, roughly, reported abuse, 8% of the abusers, the older groups to 16%, and if you look at the group of 16 to 20%, they reported a lot more cases. So in the 80s, every 12th perpetrator was reported. Now it's every third perpetrator. So that reduces the activity of sexual abusers. Of course, there is more than just one cause. There are more factors, such as the threshold of shame, which has shifted over the last 30 years. And there is the active work of a lot of organizations of victim assistance, which played a role encouraging people to leave aside a passive role, to go out, reach out for help, and tell the police. And that worked out. The silence was broken. My second example concerns physical violence against women within and without the family and home. In picture 3, you see the difference between 1992 and 2011, showing the share of the women who became the victim of physical abuse in the past 5 years before the survey. Overall, there used to be 22.8%, now the figure is 16.6%. But if you look closely, there are two counter-trends. Violence within the families is down from about 17 to about 10%. But if you look at the red chart, violence outside of families, then they're up from 1.7 to 4.1%. But why is that so? One first explanation is obvious. There is the Protection from Violence Act, and the police are implementing that actively. But there is also another point which is very important. The girls have benefited much more from changes in education than girls have. The beatings of girls, of daughters, is down from 17 to 6%. Among the boys, it's down from 14 to 8%. But the girls benefited more from the love and caress shown to children, and they benefited more than boys. And that has influences, that strengthened their self-esteem and made them more successful in education and careers. That made them more independent. They are not so easily subdued in relationships with men as they used to be, and they have more resilience against the dominance, demands of dominance raised by men. And all that decreases their risk to be a victim of family violence. More resilience means prevention. But why is the quota of women are up to such an extent for violence outside of the family? Again, the self-esteem plays a role, because the more they go out, leave the house, and take risks in their leisure time, the more often something happens to them. So the public life of women has been more exciting, but also more dangerous. But as I announced, I would like to give you a counterexample against this positive tendency, which is burglary. The criminal statistics show for the years since 2006, to 2011, a rise of about 25%. But fewer of them are ever cleared up or successfully investigated, and we expect that trend to continue. Moreover, the data of the police solving of cases, concerning solving of cases, embellish the data a little. The prosecutors see sufficient reason to press charges only in a very small amount of cases. So if you look at the statistics, it shows that burglars have a risk of being sentenced. That is about 2%. So the rest of them have a high likelihood to enjoy the fruit of their burglaries. And I think that's a bankruptcy of the rule of law. If people cannot trust that the state will protect them, something has to happen. The police mustn't be silent. It's not only their fault, but I would like to see more protest, an outcry of those who are responsible for the low number of resolution of cases. We used our survey of 2011 to get to know from the people concerned what happened. Did you experience a burglary? About every 20th of them had experienced a burglary with a damage of, on average, to 3,200 euros. Only 62% had an insurance, 38% have to pay the damage out of their own pocket. Many said, however, that something else disturbed them much more than the financial damage, which is the loss of intimacy and the sense of protection in their flat or home. Every second suffered of that mentally. Especially women reported that they have great anxieties, sleeping disorders. All in all, every fifth person left their home. And they find it very disappointing that the perpetrators were not found out by the police. If you look at those shocking data, you may ask yourself if that is an exception or if there are other examples. One point is that trafficking in people is on the increase. Many people, many girls and often boys are the victims of pedophiles, verbal abuse by pedophiles on the internet. And then there is a lot of criminality about with organized gangs such as Hells Angels and others. And that is also part of the overall picture, which all in all is positive. But they are only a limited addition to what Wiebke Steffen told us about the role of victims she gave in her excellent expert opinion. She points out very rightly that the situation, all in all, has improved in many ways, starting with the Victim Protection Act of 76 and 86. That shows that the legal position of crime victims has been strengthened. There have been 9 reforms in criminal procedures. Wiebke Steffen welcomes these reforms, and she's right in doing so, but I follow her when she critically remarks that these reforms reach only those 12% of victims which make a statement against a criminal in court, but the mass of those who work in victim protection never really come into view. Also, Wiebke Steffen is right in criticizing that these victim protection laws do not follow any concept. They are based on current events, and sometimes they are quite populist. And they're also a result of the lobbying of victim protection organizations. There is a huge deficit, as she also rightly says, between empirical science and the real demands of victims. I don't want to repeat that because we have heard a lot about this excellent closing declaration. I will come back on that specifically, but all these points can only be seen correctly if we broaden our view. Parallel justice, that's the announcement. What does that mean? A professor of Pace University, New York, Susan Horan, has launched a discussion on criminal procedures. She has been working in victim protection for more than 30 years, 7 years in Washington, leading an organization that deals with victim protection. Her thesis can be summed up in 4 points. First, criminal procedures are fixated on the perpetrator as soon as he has got his sentence and maybe he's been helped to reintegrate into society. We assume that justice has been done. For the victims of crimes, there is no comparable forum where the state gives them justice, which organizes justice for them. So the state, as has been mentioned, has tried to do justice to the needs of the victims, but thereby they only deal with that small minority that really appears in court. Due to the neglection of victim interests, we should see that justice for victims and perpetrators are 2 different things, and giving justice for victims a value of its own, we should implement 3 elements. First, find that the victims have been done injustice. The victim should be protected against re-victimizations. And 3, the victim should be protected in dealing with the consequences of victimization and get their lives back. Fourth, this does not call for a hierarchy of demands of victims. That would not be in line with our basic concept of justice. So there is no sufficient reason to give the victims of violence more rights than those of stalking, burglary, or fraud. And it must not play a role whether an offense happened in the street, in a jailhouse, in an institution, or in a psychiatric institution, for example. And the concept of parallel justice must not depend on whether the perpetrator is ever found out or sentenced. With a view to the topic of this Crime Prevention Day, Susan Herman's book has 2 clear messages. First, if you have become a victim once, you run a higher risk to become a victim again. And secondly, in parallel, there are clear proofs that victims often become offenders, especially among young people. Those who have become a victim are the most likely to become an offender themselves. For Susan Herman, the most important point is that victim assistance must not give the victims the role of a weak person that needs assistance. That would be a quiet helplessness and would rather increase the risk of re-victimization. On the other hand, we must strengthen the resilience of victims. They need practical help and assistance in actively preventing a re-victimization. But on the other hand, victim assistance should also consider that a lot of victims are very frustrated about this humiliating experience, and they want to take revenge. They want to strike back. These needs should be talked about openly, to find a way together to find a constructive solution to that problem. And that is a very effective prevention of crime. But who are the stakeholders? Who are the active people in parallel justice? The answer is simple: everybody. This goes for everybody who works in criminal procedures, in the judiciary, in schools, everybody who has to do with the fact that somebody becomes a victim. But on the other hand, those should feel involved who by chance learn about that somebody has become a victim of stalking or whatever, and make sure that that person gets help. I would like to give you a practical example from police work. Parallel justice for them means that they mustn't only focus on finding out the offender, but also they have a second task that is independently on whether they find the criminal, the perpetrator. They have to turn to the victim and give the victim a clear message. This is not just an accident, but it's injustice done to you by a criminal, and we do not accept that. The police should meet each victim respectfully with empathy and sensitivity, and they should treat every victim as credible unless there is reasonable doubt that a victim speaks the truth. Otherwise, everybody should principally be believed. Then the police have to clear in detail how great the damage is. That is important, especially if the criminal does not get caught. And the victim should get detailed information about the Weiße Ring or any state victim assistance organizations and other offerings outside the big groups, such as special victim assistance for sexually abused people. Some police officers should whisper to their neighbor, well, we do that, don't we? But I asked them, do you really? Does that also go for migrants, for example, who have become victims of a crime? We have a survey that raises doubts, or people in jailhouses. We have a survey from them. Have they ever been visited by the Weiße Ring or by the police? Have they been told that they can claim damages? And what about victims who are in a very excited state of mind? In difficult communication situation, is the victim really informed in detail later on when he or she has calmed down? There are still deficits in science, and I will come back to those. Of course, I don't have the time to speak about all other details, so I can only recommend read the inspiring book by Susan Hermans and ask yourselves, what does that mean in my role? To sum up, I would like to come back to evaluation and science. If you want to implement parallel justice, it's important that you look at the real needs of victims and that claim and demand to do justice to their needs. For practical implementation of the concept, that means that you have to evaluate the quality all the time. For example, there is Mr. Miller. He's slightly drunk, coming home from the pub. He's been beaten and robbed of his money by two other guys who had drinks with him. He reports that to the nearest police station. 1 week later, he's visited by or called by an evaluation agency cooperating with the police. They tell him that he has been anonymously chosen and he can give marks, like school marks, for what the police did with him, evaluating the communication skills of the police officer, and did he or she really ask him in detail about the damage done. He can evaluate whether he's been given information about victim recompensation laws and so on. All the tasks of the police are given marks, and then of course there's feedback to the police station about what the 50 victims said who were part of that survey, and this is done given to their superiors. If that is done nationwide, I'm sure it will improve what is offered to victims. The victimology plays a great role in the parallel justice concept. It is indispensable that we do representative surveys regularly, such as the one the Max Planck Institute on Freiburg did with the Federal Criminal Office. They surveyed 35,000 people, and that's indispensable because only thus can we evaluate whether the approaches are appropriate, whether the risks of victims are unevenly distributed within society. Together with police statistics, we can reach a better picture of the situation in Germany. But all this is not yet part of the everyday culture. We can only wish that that survey presented in May will be done regularly. The second victimological approach is quite a different one. In these representative surveys, we only have very small figures concerning victims. We also need figures concerning only people who have become victims of a certain type of crime. That's the basis for us to evaluate whether, for example, victim recompensation law is really fair and just. Only when we can compare stalking victims, burglary victims in a comparative manner, what kind of stress they are under, can we say if they have a stronger stress than, for example, people who have experienced physical violence and who have legal claim to compensations. Then we can check whether we have the right basis for those who have claims to financial recompensation. Sometimes only 10% of the victims of violent crime claim recompensation. We don't know why, and we don't know why the figure is 5 to 6% in one federal state and 16 to 17% in another. But on the other hand, we also have to check the way the Victim Recompensation Act is carried out. We have reasonable doubt to see whether that is the case, but we haven't got any scientific evidence yet wondering whether people who have a claim really receive the money, or is there some problem on the way which we have to tackle. It won't be easy to get the ministries and authorities to cooperate, but I'm cautiously optimistic, at least with regard to one group of victims. At the round table of against child abuse, the politicians gave us one clear signal. The State Secretary, Dr. Niederfregger, in the Ministry of Labour, was in favor of a scientific research to clarify exactly these points. Ladies and gentlemen, what I have told you at the example of the victim recompensation law, there is Susan Herman's appeal to us about parallel justice, a better practical implementation of the law, and also legislatory reforms. For both approaches, we need wide-ranging scientific surveys. But this is not the entire goal of victimology. It has an indirect, immediate value for victims. If science deals with the sufferings they have, that at the same time means appreciation. It means taking them seriously. It means that they are being listened to. What happened to them is taken stock of. It's registered. It's published. So it can all be hushed up and forgotten. I'm stressing this point because at the moment there is one large group of victims we have at the moment who might not be appreciated enough. And I mean that the children who were sexually abused by priests as children. The German Conference of Bishops had a contract with our institution that would have given the victims a broad forum to get involved. But then the project failed because the church suddenly changed the contract, trying to introduce censorship and control, which we could not tolerate. The question that remains open is what value the victims have, or what status they will have in a follow-up project that has been announced. The Conference of Bishops has announced the following. One of the important goals is, again, the raising of reliable data and looking at the personal files to find out who the perpetrators were and what exactly they did and to what extent, and to get a deeper insight into what happened. The victims are not even mentioned. I wonder if that has to do with the fact that obviously many files were destroyed. The church had denied that, but when they couldn't deny it any longer, they pointed out that when the files were destroyed, there was always a short version that was kept, so science would still be possible, or research would still be possible. But through the destruction of files, it was exactly that information concerning the sufferings of the victims that got destroyed. And from a point of view of victimology, these abbreviated files are not worth anything. So if there was to be a relaunch of the project, I think the church should lay open in advance how many files were destroyed in each diocese, and only then could one judge whether this research makes sense from a point of view of victims. But first off, we have to wait, because there is another perspective, that is that the church just will just wait, not do anything. But the public will not let them get away with that if they try to do that. But I don't want to end up with this statement about the churches. I would like to give you a short look at a very interesting project of Stuttgart University about sexual abuse. Dieter Urban and Joachim Fiebig looked at a lot of files and did an excellent data analysis and found something that doesn't seem surprising. For men who were sexually abused by a pedophile criminal, there is a high risk in later life to become a sex offender themselves. But the second finding is more interesting. If these people were abused early on, but if they have become rather aggressive as young adults, they are less likely to become sex offenders. The authors give a plausible explanation for this. The aggressive behavior of such young people is to be seen as a strategy to cope with the trauma they have suffered. If the boy proves himself as an aggressive fighter, he compensates the loss of self-esteem caused by the abuse. What does that teach us? For your way home, I'll give you some food for thought. Two thoughts in particular. First, we should be very careful with aggressive children. There can be many reasons for their behavior. One of them could be an earlier abuse experience. Secondly, simply punishing and stopping aggressive behavior of children would be the wrong way. We mustn't cease to show ways to such children in particular how they can raise their self-esteem and self-effectiveness in a decent way. And I think the slogan is raise the zeal for life by giving them challenges in sports, music, drama groups, circuses, and other kinds of activities. If the children really develop a passion for one of these things, then that experience gives cause to a sense of self-effectiveness. And that is exactly what I spoke about earlier. This would raise the resilience and that would really be prevention. And on the other hand, it would be an enhanced experience, an enhanced ability to cope with victimization experience. Thank you very much for listening.